Annals of Arithmancy, Chapter 17. Family Life. Disclaimer. Snape. Severus Snape. J.K Rowling. 25th of December, 2006. The entire Weasley family was shocked. Not that Ron had brought home a girlfriend. He did that fairly regularly. Not even that his girlfriend was a Spanish beauty named Juanita who could give Fleur a run for her money. He'd become quite the world traveler in his own right in recent years. He was a respected Auror and runes expert, and he'd led the Chudley Cannons to their first winning season in over 100 years, so he was a good catch. And she was a scholar of Iberian runes, so it was natural that they'd met at some point. No, what shocked the Weasley family was that they were serious enough that Ron had brought her home for Christmas. Partly because that was the only day the whole family would be there. He would be staying with her family for New Year's, he said. Hermione felt like she and George had missed a whole lot while they were in Antarctica. That did look pretty serious. And Molly was so excited, it was hard for her to help being nosy about where their relationship was going. "Juanita's family is sort of old-fashioned, you know," Ron finally admitted. "So I want to visit them at New Year's so I can be traditional and ask her father for a hand." Molly squealed at a frequency that shouldn't be allowed. "Oh, that's so wonderful, Ron! And Juanita, it's a pleasure to meet you. I do hope it goes well for you two. That would be everyone in the family." "What am I, the next-door neighbor?" Charlie spoke up. That brought Molly up short. "Oh, no, Charlie, I didn't mean," she stammered. It's just that, after this long, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "I understand, Mum," he assured her. "I know what you meant. Since it's come up, I have a confession, too. I'm asexual. I'm happy for the rest of you, but I'm not really ever expecting to settle down." He looked around, not nervous exactly, but as if he was expecting some kind of pushback. The response, however, was more of a shrug. I can see that," Ron said. "Wait, was that a secret?" "Ow!" Fred said before being smacked in the back of the head by Angelina. Dora said she suspected it," Harry said sheepishly when Charlie looked at him. Charlie groaned. "Just because the one date I went on with her turned out that badly—" Arthur spoke up, giving a stern look to his other children. "It's nothing to be ashamed of, Charlie. Your Uncle Bilious was the same way, which maybe isn't the best comparison, but there's nothing wrong with it either way, and honestly, your mother and I sort of suspected, too." "Thanks, Dad," he said. "And I'm not ashamed. I just feel a little uncomfortable being in this family with this many kids." "Oh, none of that now," Molly stopped him. "Your father and I are a special case. We both love kids, and we wanted to keep going until we had a girl." "And that's what I need to hear," Ginny said loudly. "How about those cannons?" Molly rolled her eyes. "Honestly, Ginny, you have two of your own now," she said, although she did drop the topic. Juanita looked around and met the eyes of the other wives at the table. "Are they always like this?" she asked. "You have no idea," Hermione said. But Ginny had paused, with her fork hanging loosely over her plate, at Molly's remark. Mum," she said, "I suppose now's as good a time as any. We've actually started another one," Ginny said. "What?" everyone gasped, and Molly added, "Oh, Ginny, I'm so happy! This is just the best Christmas! When did you find out?" "Just this week. We weren't sure about telling you this early, but with my Weasley genes and how well the first two went, we thought it was fine. We're hoping for a girl this time. Oh, bugger, I had to say it, didn't I?" Everyone laughed. That announcement fully restored the mood of the party. Everyone gave a round of congratulations, and they toasted the Potters with sparkling cider, an old family tradition since there always seemed to be at least one pregnant woman around. A little later, however, Molly couldn't fully suppress her interest in completing the set. "So, George and Hermione, Have you been thinking about starting a family of your own now that you'll be moving into your own house soon? She asked with a mirthful look in her eyes that showed she knew she was needling just a bit. Hermione and George smiled at each other. We've talked about it, yes, Hermione said. We're still not in any hurry, but maybe not holding back any more. Ginny snorted. Dangerous words in this family. Hermione gave her a look. Well, we'll have the house by this summer, so we're fine either way. That evening, the godchildren, Marcus, Sasha, and Morgan, came over for a visit. They always spent most of Christmas with their own families, but they still wanted to spend time with their godparents. As a result, the burrow was more of a ruckus than it had ever been when Arthur and Molly's own children were young, with 3 8-year-olds and 5 more 4 and under running around. Luckily, they were quieted down when Fred and George brought out their surprise, setting up a colorful cardboard stage in the living room. Gather round, Fred called. Oi, kids, that means get over here, George said. The children gathered around the stage, with the adults standing behind them, perplexed. The twins were in full showman mode as they spoke. Presenting the first ever Weasley Brothers Christmas play, dramatizing the feats of our valiant heroes in war against Voldemort, and their other childhood antics. They quickly darted out of sight behind the stage. What are they doing? Ginny whispered to Hermione. I'm not sure. They wanted it to be a surprise, so I've only got an inkling. Suddenly, a hand puppet with spiky black hair and 2 big white circles for glasses popped up from behind the stage. Daddy! Little James squealed. They didn't, Harry said. They did. The hairy puppet flailed comically and said, I feel cranky and pubescent today, and I don't know why. Grr, I'm going to take it out on people I like. What? When was I ever like that? Harry said. 5th year, Hermione, Ginny, and Ron responded to general laughter, although Hermione added, Granted, I wasn't much better. A red-haired puppet with a cheerful smile popped up next to Harry. It didn't look like Ginny, but it spoke with a silly falsetto voice. Hello, Harry! What sort of tomfoolery shall we get into today? No tomfoolery today, Ron. I'm sick of your dreadful speckled mug. The Ron puppet stood still, obviously still smiling. Why must you hurt me this way, Harry? A Hermione puppet appeared next. Yeah, what's your problem, Harry? Oi, why do I sound like a girl? Ron said. Why do I sound like a boy? Hermione said. Why do I sound like an ass? Harry demanded. They heard a musical laugh coming from behind them, and they both spun around and were surprised to see Fleur giggling at the show. But it is a commedia dell'arte, she said. It is supposed to be silly and satirical. Look, the children like it. They looked down at the floor and saw Sasha and Nadia giggling, and Hermione thought she saw Marcus smirk a little, and she decided to give it a chance. The plot of the sketch seemed to be that Harry was angsty and wanted to quit magic, and the ridiculous consequences that ensued, like Harry trying to send Ron to fight Voldemort. The Voldemort puppet had big red eyes and that same cheerful grin on its face. Marcus gasped in surprise when he saw it, as did many of the adults, that the twins would actually do that. 2-year-old Billy even panicked and ran back to Ginny. But Voldemort didn't attack Ron. Instead, he spoke in an exaggerated Bond villain sort of voice. "Hello, little child. You want a piece of me? What?" Ron trembled and whimpered, and then ran away, to the dismay of the real Ron. Then he pushed the Hermione puppet towards Voldemort. "Get him, Hermione!" he said. Hermione and Voldemort stared each other down for a moment. Then the Hermione puppet raised a tiny wand. "Hex in the face!" "Ah!" Voldemort said as he fell over. That time, everyone laughed, even the littlest kids who liked the slapstick. The skit meandered on from there, with more silliness like Ron and Harry getting in a slap fight, Snape showing up and trying to give them detention, and Dumbledore randomly flying up past the top of the stage. None of it made any sense, but by the end of it, even Harry was laughing at the silliness of it. "Okay, I admit it. That was pretty cool," Hermione told George afterwards. 6th of March, 2007. Snape, Snape, Severus Snape, Dumbledore! What are you doing? Hermione asked, giggling a little. Trying to figure out how many voices we need for this skit, George said. It's a complicated one. Let me see that. She took the script from him and read it over, raising an eyebrow when she reached the bottom. I found the source of the ticking. It's a pipe bomb? That's a little morbid, don't you think? So, kids love explosions, he insisted. But Voldemort wins at the end, she protested. It's a work in progress. Hermione carelessly tossed the parchment behind her. Well, here's some interesting news you'll want to know. What's that? He said. I'm pregnant. George swooned. Actually, swooned, so that Hermione had to catch him. Pregnant, he said. Yes. We're gonna have a baby. Well, I certainly hope so, she said. It'd be rather embarrassing if we had a measle. George cracked up. I love you, he said, and he pulled her in for a steamy kiss. 25th of June, 2007. I'm honestly surprised to see you here again, Mr. Spudmore, Harry said. The head of the Firebolt Corporation sat down in his parlor while Ginny lounged in the opposite chair. We didn't exactly part on the best of terms last time. I apologize for being short with you 5 years ago, Mr. Potter, Spudmore said. Learning just how badly the Millennium was doomed to failure seriously hurt the company, and the broomstick industry in general, to be frank. But don't think that we don't take your advice to heart. We've been busy all this time. Really? Ginny piped up. With what? The Millennium was already past the limit of what was useful. Past the limit in speed, Mrs. Potter, Spudmore corrected. Those weren't the only changes we could make. In fact, after that report, we split our product line. We're still working on the ultimate Quidditch broom, fixing the problems of the Firebolt Classic and the Millennium that have cropped up over the years. But our other product line has just turned out our first production model. He opened a box and took out a broom that was longer than the box. It was like no broom they'd ever seen before. As different as the Nimbus 2000 looked from an ordinary kitchen broom, this was just as far beyond a Nimbus. It was over 7 feet long and looked impossibly sleek, with toe loops on the ironwork and molded hand grips on the shaft, far enough up that it was clear the rider was supposed to lie nearly flat on it. Silver lines like whirls of wind and visible runes were drawn all over the shaft. What on earth? Harry said. Is that even a broom? Said Ginny. Wow, said James. This, Spudmore said proudly, is the firebolt jetstream, probably the only pure racing broom on the market. Pure racing broom? Harry said. By that, I mean it's only good for racing, he replied. If it were the size of a normal broom, it would have about the maneuverability of a good comet. At this size, even less. But the reason is that we stripped down everything in exchange for pure speed. Harry hesitated from touching the broom. How much speed are we talking about? He asked. We've tested it at up to 250 miles per hour. Harry's jaw dropped. 250? That beat the next fastest broom on the market by nearly 100 miles an hour. It was twice as fast as the top Nimbus. And you want me to review it? He asked. When Spudmore nodded, Harry turned to face Ginny, and they communicated mentally for a minute. Then he went to the flue. Yeah, no. I'm checking with Hermione to make sure flying at those speeds won't suck my lungs out or something. Certainly, Mr. Potter, Spudmore said, although we did include a windscreen charm into the design. Harry and Ginny considered that for a moment. Yeah, still asking Hermione, he said. 3rd of July, 2007. George and Hermione waved the moving truck into the lane they'd had built up to their house. They'd already accepted several furniture deliveries and the like, but this was the final move, clearing out their increasingly cluttered flat, plus adding a shopping spree's worth of baby supplies and housewarming gifts from the various family members. They were finally moving into their new house, Windrose Field. The Muggle builders had finished on schedule, and they'd discreetly added their own magical touches leading up to today. They had to rent a Muggle moving truck to avoid suspicion, but things were looking pretty good. The house didn't look like that much from the road, by both necessity and design. Though large, it was set far back and partly concealed by trees. The landscaping was just started, but it should look really nice by next spring. They were also considering whether to grow some proper crops considering how much land they had. Pumpkins especially seemed appropriate. "Well, that's the last truckload," George said. "It feels good to finally have a place of our own, doesn't it?"
"Definitely," Hermione said. "But that's the last truckload to move in, you mean? The nursery isn't finished, or the study, and I'd still like to buy a piano."
"Ah, details," he said.
"The nursery certainly isn't a detail,"
she said indignantly, resting a hand on her stomach.
"The nursery's almost finished,"
George insisted, patting her tummy lightly and then kissing her.
"It'll be fine."
Before they could join the movers, though, another couple came walking up the street to them. They were a few years older than George and Hermione, and the woman was also visibly pregnant. Two of the neighbors, they guessed. Their immediate neighbors, the Lawsons, from whom they'd bought the land, the Schofields, and the Dysons, all lived in farmhouses on the opposite side of the street. The fifth home in the neighborhood was about a half-mile up the road. So it was a good bet these two were among them. "Good morning," the man called to them, waving as he approached. George and Hermione waved, and George called, "Good morning," back to them. When the couple drew closer, the man said, "So you're the mysterious Weasleys, I take it? We've been wondering a lot about you." "That's us," George said with his winning smile. "George Weasley at your service, and this is my lovely wife, Hermione Granger." The woman quirked an eyebrow at the different last names, but didn't comment on it. "Pleasure, Mr. Weasley," the man said. "I'm Christopher Dyson, and this is my wife, Rebecca. We live down at the end of the row. It's good to finally meet you."
"Thank you, Mr. Dyson," Hermione said as they all shook hands. "We've wanted to meet the neighbors, but it's been awfully busy with the move."
"I can imagine, especially building your own house. That certainly takes commitment," he said. "We were all surprised when Tom Lawson said you came up to him and asked to buy up practically this whole side of the road. We get people from the city coming out here, but not usually this far from civilization." "It suits us," George said, taking Hermione's hand. "When we got married, we agreed we'd build a big place in the country once we were ready. It's pretty great, finally seeing it finished." "Yes, it's really something," Mr. Dyson replied. "I don't get why you wanted to build that far back, though." Hermione smiled. They'd come up with a better cover story since they started this project.
"George grew up in a place a lot like this," Hermione said. "Well back from the road and surrounded by fields."
"It's nice and quiet," he said.
"And when I was a little girl, I dreamed of getting a big country house with gardens on all four sides."
9 acres worth?" Mrs. Dyson said. She shrugged. They were always going to come off a little eccentric in private. She just hoped they wouldn't cross the line into sketchy or creepy. As they talked, they briefly went over the rest of their cover story, keeping as close to the truth as possible. Hermione was a researcher at Doncaster College, which was false, and was working on her Ph.D., which was true. In England, you could actually earn a Ph.D. by publication, solely by getting peer-reviewed papers in the subject published, and she'd been putting out papers on fractal analysis in Muggle journals every so often. And George was a successful shop owner in the city, so together they'd been saving up for the past 8 years for a really big move like this.
"We wish you luck moving in," Mrs. Dyson finally said. "Do give us a call if you have any questions about the area, or if your car breaks down at the worst possible time. That happened to us once."
She glanced at Hermione knowingly. Hermione snorted.
"Thank you, Mrs. Dyson, but we made sure to get the car checked." "Good thinking. When are you due?" "Late October," she said, smiling. "A girl, and quite a lively one according to the other women in the family."
Little Emmy was already doing her best to disrupt her sleep, though she was thankfully being calmer today.
Good timing, then." "Well, that was the plan," Hermione said. "What about you?" "End of September," she replied. but this is our fourth and the third boy."
"Ah, sounds like my family, then." George grinned. He jerked a thumb at his chest. "5th of 7, and only one girl."
"7? Kudos to your mother, then. I don't think I could handle 3 more of these. Good luck, you two."
Once the Dysons left, Hermione and George walked up the lane to their new home. It was the length of the Quidditch pitch, but it worked for them. Soon the truck was unloaded and left, and they could start unpacking. The young couple had spared no expense on the house, Hermione even stepping up Archimedes Jewelry's production to cover some of it. They had everything a well-off magical family with one foot in the Muggle world could need. There was a conservatory with a dedicated section for magical plants, a swimming pool, and a low-set stone circle outside for scratch runes work. They didn't have any animals besides owls and cats, but they could always add some later. There were gardens, and they'd kept some of the trees from the hedgerows, which they would subtly encourage to grow so they could potentially build a treehouse there in a few years. The house itself was 4 stories, although the 3rd floor was basically just the observatory, with a 2-car garage, even though they'd just now bought their first one. The west wing was a still large, but self-contained, simple family dwelling. That section had pretty standard fare: parlor, including the main flue, drawing room, including television and stereo, and study, with high-speed internet, with the addition of a library, because of course, and a private family dining room. This part of the house looked close to Muggle, and this was for the benefit of Muggle visitors. In a hidden panel beside the front door, there was an oversized knife switch like something out of Frankenstein that could be flopped to present a Muggle-worthy appearance. The basement likewise held the kitchen, old-fashioned as it was, pantry, utility room, and storage room, and the first floor held the master suite, nursery, and eventual children's bedrooms. The rest of the house was more elaborate and magical. The main foyer opened onto the stereotypical twin staircases. They were fairly compact ones, but still the most overtly ostentatious thing they'd included. Hermione had drawn the line at the ballroom and the Grecian columns. Tucked into a corner behind the stairs was a proper lift in case someone needed one. Straight back from there was a dining hall as large as the one at Pruitt Manor. They would hardly ever use it except for holidays, but they did want one. The intent was that, if they squeezed tables in close together, it would be able to hold a Weasley family reunion even when the children had children of their own. The east wing, only 2 stories, held the more specialized rooms. A gallery, which held many of both Hermione's and George's creations, a music room, since Hermione played piano a little, and a small room that they half-jokingly called the armory, which was mainly storage for anything they might need in a major fight. George's workshop was there too, owing to the need for adequate ventilation for his inventions. The space above was for storage in lieu of an attic, but below it the rest of the basement consisted of a small, soundproofed shooting gallery that could catch both spells and bullets, a warded dueling room, a small gym, and Hermione's workshop, where she could do arcane arithmetic experiments and artificing away from prying eyes. The 2nd floor contained the house elf quarters and more bedrooms. They made sure to have enough to host a sleepover with at least a dozen kids. And above that was the observatory, complete with a rotating dome, darkroom lights, and a state-of-the-art electronic Muggle telescope. George's hand showed too, of course. There were multiple secret passages in the house, both architectural and magical, and they had created a map to monitor the property. Guests who went snooping where they shouldn't would be struck by some minor, harmless pranks. A special shed in the back contained a frankly worrying amount of fireworks. And it was his idea for the master bath to include a bathtub large enough for 2 people, something Hermione wholeheartedly approved. It sounded like a lot, but it wasn't much more than what Harry and Ginny had at Grimmauld Place, and only half of what Percy and Audrey had at Pruitt Manor. And beneath it all, in the sub-basement, were the anchor stones. A circle of 8 stone columns of pure quartz, about 8 feet high and 2 feet wide, covered all over with runes powerful enough to extend wards over the whole 9-acre property, and, when pulled back to the house, able to stand up to a siege. There wasn't a panic room per se, but there were strategically placed passages into the sub-basement, which was quite possibly the most magically secure room in the country. Hermione had even considered changing the quartz to diamond or sapphire, but quartz was the alchemically purer form of earth, so that was still the best for area wards built on ley lines. Contrary to the stereotype, they unpacked everything from the truck that day. It was a much easier task with magic, but it still took all day. Nonetheless, it was a tired but very happy Hermione and George who fell into their new bed that night, and they both agreed it was their best anniversary yet. 25th of October, 2007.
Labor and delivery straight back,
the welcome witch said before Hermione and George even reached the counter. Not that they needed directions. After enough nieces and nephews, they knew the way blindfolded. George led his wife back as she leaned on his arm.
St. Crispin's Day,
Hermione muttered.
Mom's going to take the mickey when she gets here.
No, she's not, George said.
Oh, she will. I'll bet you a gallon she will.
Deal. So, he said as they reached the entrance to the delivery ward. His voice was trembling a little. Once more into the breach?
Please don't use the word breach.
Why not? They checked, didn't they?
Yes, and she's just fine, but it's the principle of the thing.
They went inside the ward and were immediately met by a healer. Cadwallader, her name tag said. She looked like she'd just woken up, but she was already moving, hurriedly getting set up, probably having been buzzed over the intercom when they walked in the building.
Ah, Professor Granger,
she said cheerfully.
It's about that time, is it? Yes, healer,
Hermione said.
Right this way, then. I'll put you in room 1. I'll be your midwife through the whole thing unless you request someone else, but specialists are on call if you need one. Thank you, healer,
Hermione said. St. Mungo's had a grand total of 4 delivery rooms, since the odds of more than 4 rooms being needed on the same day were quite long, and they could easily adapt a normal room with magic in case of emergencies. Most of the time, only 0 or 1 were in use at any one time. Hermione strongly suspected there was only a single healer staffing the ward when no deliveries were going on, probably reading a newspaper or something. Healer Cadwallader instructed her to change into a gown and then sit upright on the bed. Things weren't too bad yet, so she did that quickly and leaned back and tried to relax while she waited for the inevitable arrival of the rest of the family. George was also told to change for hygiene's sake, and he pulled up an armless chair that happened to be at the same height as the bed, allowing him to comfortably put his arm around her shoulders. Hermione's parents were first to arrive, mainly because she'd given strict instructions that they be contacted first. The Weasleys were a little much at times like this. Dan and Emma Granger soon came in to see their daughter and congratulate her. Once they assured that she and Emmy were both doing all right, Emma said,
So, St. Crispin's Day. You're continuing the tradition of Shakespearean dates, I see.
Hermione grinned and held her hand out to George.
Pay up,
she said. George groaned and summoned his wallet. He pulled out a gallon and handed it to Hermione, only for her to realize she had nowhere to put it. She tossed it on the windowsill. Emma looked at both of them and said,
I think I missed something here.
Hermione and George looked at each other and started laughing.
I knew you'd say that,
she said.
Ah, well, I'm glad to see you're in good spirits, Hermione.
Shortly after that, some indeterminate number of Weasleys arrived. Fred somehow managed to slip in first. He hugged George and clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Congratulations, brother. I'd offer you a drink, but I don't think the missus would appreciate it."
And neither would the midwife, Healer Cadwallader spoke up. And do try not to disturb Mum.
Fred chuckled. "Good luck, Georgie," he said before turning to leave.
"Good luck to yours too, Freddie," George called after him. "Only 2 more months, yeah?"
Molly, Arthur, Ron, Harry, and even Ginny all turned up soon after Fred. Baby Lily was presumably being held by yet another family member outside, since Ginny wouldn't leave a 7-week-old infant alone for long. The 4th of September, thankfully, They'd been concerned about the girls being born on opposite sides of the Hogwarts cutoff. At that point, Hermione thanked them all for coming, and promptly banished everyone from the delivery room except for George and her mother. Ginny laughed and winked on her way out. She'd had to do the same thing all 3 times. Once things in the delivery room calmed down, Hermione's labor proceeded refreshingly normally. Healer Cadwallader said she was progressing fine, maybe a little fast, but not enough to be troublesome. Magic, she said, tended to smooth over the little things. Sadly, the pain was not among them, as Hermione soon found out, although there was still plenty of room for complications. In the first few hours, Hermione felt like she was mostly just waiting. She tried to sleep, but didn't have much success with the excitement. She asked George to read to her from a science fiction book she'd picked up in the store not long ago, and her mom later took it up when his voice got tired. Healer Cadwallader was thoroughly confused. Still, as the morning wore on, it grew harder for Hermione. It didn't help that she'd only got a couple hours' sleep.
"You'd think there'd be a faster way to do this with magic,"
she grumbled at one point. The healer shook her head.
"Not a good idea to mix magic with such a delicate process, or an about-to-be-born infant in general. If something goes wrong, there are a number of things we can do, but it's better to do it naturally if you can." Yes, I understand," Hermione said. "I did not get enough sleep for this." "Better than losing a full night," the healer insisted. "I see that often enough."
Hermione nodded and thought for a moment.
30.38%. Excuse me? Normal labor is estimated to run between 11 and 11/12 and 21.5 hours, she explained. Taking 16 and 17/24 hours as the median, and assuming a normal sleep schedule, you're guaranteed to lose some sleep, and you have a minimum of a 30.38% chance of losing a full night. Realistically closer to 50-50 because you won't go to sleep right after. Although, I suppose I don't know how many mothers nap through the beginning.
The healer just stared at Hermione. George chuckled. That's the Hermione I love. He kissed her on the forehead and turned to the healer. Yes, she really is like that, especially when she's stressed. If she loses her grip on numbers, that's when you really need to worry. Cadwallader just shook her head, clearly out of her depth. The pain grew worse over time as the contractions grew stronger. Hermione was offered a pain potion that was certified to be safe for childbirth, then was offered it again when Healer Cadwallader pronounced her in active labor, but she refused both times. Safe was a relative term, even with magic. Especially with magic, and she didn't want to take it if she didn't need to. Still, the clenched teeth and white-knuckled grip on the bed frame when she started getting close were impossible for George and Mum to ignore. Finally, George just came out and said it. "Hermione, aren't you in pain?"
"Yeah, lots,"
she said, breathlessly. He stared at her. Not that I'm complaining, but why aren't you screaming and threatening to hex my bollocks off?"
"Easy. Occlumency."
Cadwallader's eyebrows shot up under her healer's cap.
"You're using occlumency to suppress the pain?" "Sure. Muggle women do it all the time. It's called hypnobirthing. Not exactly the same, but close enough."
She hesitated, and then added,
"Besides, I spent time under the Cruciatus curse of Bellatrix Lestrange during the war. Compared with that, this is easy." "My God, I'm so sorry. Well, if you think you can handle it, that's great, but please don't try to be a hero." "I'll be fine," Hermione insisted. "The human brain has an amazing capacity for self-regulation if you know how to train it. Occlumency is just one form, and if used with specific knowledge of neurology—" She stopped cold. Oh, I need a pen." "Wait, what?" "A pen and paper, quickly!" "Why?" "I think I just had an idea about how Ravenclaw's diadem works. I need to jot it down before I forget." "Professor Granger, this is hardly the time," the healer said. "It'll only take a minute. I just need to make sure I remember it later." George grabbed Hermione's handbag and pulled out a pen and a small notepad and handed them to her. "I've got it. It's best if you don't argue with her about something like this," he told the healer.
Arithmancy is not something she can switch off. Hermione did only need about a minute to jot down her thought, and none too soon because the healer checked her after the next contraction and concluded. You're just about there. You're going to have to start pushing. We better get you in position. I'll just stick you there. Then, to Hermione's alarm, she used a sticking charm to fix her to the bed. Hermione jerked, pulling the sheets with her before she noticed her hands and feet were still free. She nearly went for her wand. She could still remember being stuck to the floor at Malfoy Manor. "What's that for?" she cried. Molly hadn't used anything like that with Fleur, the one birth she'd personally witnessed, although they hadn't had much to work with at the time. "Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot you're Muggle-born. You might not have seen this before. I didn't mean to scare you. Lying on your back is a terrible position to deliver a baby if you can help it. No gravity, and it tilts your hips in the wrong direction. We prefer half lying here, so you don't have to support your full weight. But by all means, if another position is more comfortable for you, please let me know and I'll help you adjust." Hermione held up a hand, considering it. "I'll try it," she said. "You ought to warn people sooner, though. Brings back some bad memories." "Oh dear, I really am sorry. If you're okay with it, though." The healer placed her feet in stirrups that were placed lower than she expected, and suddenly the whole bed tilted forward, stopping when she was more upright than not. She'd been nearly squatting if her feet were on the floor. The sticking charm was surprisingly comfortable with her weight distributed over her whole back, even more than it would be with just friction. "Huh," Mum said. "I learnt plenty about childbirth at university, but I can honestly say I haven't seen that one before." "Well, Muggles still insist on lying down for this," the healer said dismissively. No, I've heard of modern hospitals using methods like this, but they would never use a contraption like that to do it." I think it actually works," Hermione said. "It's strange, but I think I could do this a lot longer than I could squat on the floor. It just took me by surprise." Healer Cadwallader nodded. "Thank you for understanding, Professor Granger," she said. Then she conjured a thick, soft cushion on the floor between Hermione's legs. "Do you need that cushion often?" George said in alarm. "Not since I've been here. No need to worry, Mr. Weasley, but better safe than sorry. Now, please get ready." The pushing took over an hour, and it was painful and exhausting, and took all of Hermione's occlumency strength and George's support to get through, and she did have to change positions a couple of times, but at the end of it, Hermione delivered a healthy baby girl flawlessly in the mid-afternoon. When Emmy's cries filled the room, Hermione's mum squealed. Actually squealed, and George was speechless, looking like he was about to fall over. The bed tilted back to only a slight incline, and Healer Cadwallader placed the squirming baby girl on Hermione's chest. "She looks perfectly healthy, dear," the healer said. "Just let me log the time, and do you have a name?" "Yes, Emmy," Hermione said. "Emmy Septima Granger Weasley." Emmy was partly for her mother, but was also for Emmy Noether, whose eponymous theorem had indirectly saved all their lives in the war by unlocking ritual craft for Hermione. Mum assured her she perfectly understood. And Septima was for her favorite teacher, of course. They'd agreed that George got first pick of names for the next one, within reason. Hermione noted that Emmy already had short but substantial wisps of red hair covering her head. Those Weasley genes wouldn't go down without a fight. She was quite wiggly, too, but she calmed down with skin-to-skin contact. "She's beautiful," Hermione breathed. "Both of you are," George said, kissing them both. "How do you feel?" "Still not as wiped out as when I fought Bellatrix, so I'm calling it a win." He let out a short laugh. "We have a beautiful, perfect new daughter, Hermione. I'm calling it a win either way." Hermione sighed happily and stroked Emmy's head, though as she did, she felt a cramp in her fingers. She pulled back and looked at her hand curiously. She flexed her fingers, and then toes. "Something wrong?" Mum asked. "My hands and feet ache," she said. "That's odd. I can't see how I could have strained all of them." Healer Cadwallader came back over. "All of your hands and feet?" she said. She manipulated Hermione's fingers briefly. "Has this happened before?" She tilted her head uncertainly. "Once in a while, maybe," she admitted.
Associated with stress, I think. Why, is there a problem? You said you suffered under the Cruciatus during the war? It could be lingering curse damage. And before you ask, no, it won't affect your daughter. And it looks very minor, but I'd like to call someone from spell damage to take a look.
Hermione waved her on.
Go ahead.
She, her husband, and her mum all waited in awkward silence for the other healer to arrive. She reassured herself that it was obviously very minor, but it was still a nasty surprise to discover on such a happy day. Thankfully, when the healer from spell damage arrived, he needed only a minute to scan her.
Well, I'm afraid that's slight nerve damage from Cruciatus exposure, he concluded. But luckily it's a very mild case.
He checked the chart.
You say you feel pain only rarely, associated with stress. Maybe associated with overexertion instead?
She considered that.
Yes, it could be. I thought so. I've seen this before. There's a certain amount of nerve damage that your magic can compensate for. It's automatic. You don't even know you're doing it. You got especially lucky there. Much longer under the curse and victims start to lose functionality fast. But for you, your nerves still work normally. Living a normal life, you'll probably never even notice it. But when you're pushed to your limit and need all your strength, your body can't keep it up and you feel the pain come through. I'm afraid we can't do anything about it, but it also won't get any worse. Not until you're old enough to get arthritis at least, and maybe longer. He left her with that assurance, but she saw George was still looking at her in worry. Worry about how she would feel maybe, but when his eyes met hers she smiled. And it was a genuine smile. I'm fine, George, really, she said. I know this isn't what you wanted to learn today of all days, he said. George, I'm truly okay with it, she insisted. She looked down at her arms that now held their newborn daughter. She could still read clearly on her left arm a scar that read, Mudblood, and another on her right hand that read, I must not tell lies. It's just one more scar from the war, she said, and we survived that ages ago. We've moved past it. We get to live our lives as a family, and not Voldemort, nor Umbridge, nor Bellatrix, nor Barty Crouch can take that away from us. That's all I need. Chapter Endnotes. Next Generation Kids as of 31st of December 2007. Bill and Fleur have Nadia, who's 9. Remus and Tonks have Sasha, who's 9, and Morgan, who's 5. Percy and Audrey have Molly, who's 4. Fred and Angelina have Lee, 3, and Roxanne, on the way. George and Hermione have Marcus, 9, and Emmy, 2 months. Ginny and Harry have James, 5, Bill, 3, and Lily, 3 months. And also Columbia Malfoy, who's 9.